night, the Beard went silent. James Harden did not leave the NBA with confetti falling, a trophy in his hands, or a crowd chanting his name like a conquering hero. He left under bright white lights inside Rocket Arena with the echo of a 3-7 point loss still hanging in the air and the weight of 17 seasons pressing down on his shoulders. On the 25th of May, 2026, the Cleveland Cavaliers walked into Game 4 of the Eastern Conference Finals with their season barely breathing. Down 0-3 to the New York Knicks, they needed a miracle just to survive one more night. The fans showed up anyway. Red jerseys filled the building. Noise shook the seats. Hope, even desperate hope, still had a pulse. Then the Knicks buried it. Final score, 130-93. And for James Harden, the box score looked colder than the loss itself. 12 points, 2 made shots, 5 turnovers, more mistakes than baskets. For a former MVP, for a man who once averaged 36.1 points per game and bent entire defenses with one step-back three, that final stat line felt almost cruel. It did not look like the ending of a legend. It looked like the kind of ending his critics had been waiting years to screenshot. But the real shock did not come when the buzzer sounded. It came after. Harden walked to the podium, no long speech, no dramatic pause for applause, no carefully polished farewell video, just a tired man in front of microphones, after a brutal sweep telling the basketball world that he was done. And suddenly, every debate stopped for a second. The jokes stopped, the hot takes froze. The fans who had spent years arguing about Harden's playoff failures, his trade demands, his defense, his lifestyle, his missing ring, and his place in history were forced to face one simple truth: James Harden was gone. This was not just the end of a season. This was the end of one of the most complicated careers the NBA has ever seen. A career brilliant enough to change basketball, but painful enough to leave one question behind. How can a player be this great and still leave the game feeling unfinished? So before we go deeper, tell me where you are watching from. Are you in Houston, where Harden became a king? Are you in Cleveland, where the final chapter collapsed? Or are you somewhere else watching the last page of the Beard story finally turn? Comment 1 if you believe James Harden is still an all-time legend, ring or no ring. Comment 2 if you believe the missing championship will always haunt his legacy. And if you follow NBA stories that go deeper than the box score, subscribe now, because this story is only getting heavier from here. The sweep that broke, the illusion. The series did not end in Game 4. Not really. It ended the moment the Knicks discovered the one matchup Cleveland could not hide. Game 1 should have belonged to the Cavaliers. For most of the night, Cleveland looked faster, deeper, and more desperate. Donovan Mitchell was attacking. Evan Mobley was protecting the paint. The crowd could feel it. This was supposed to be the game that proved the Cavs were not just happy to be back in the Eastern Conference Finals. They were supposed to announce that they belonged there. Then came the fourth quarter. Cleveland had a 2-2-point lead. The kind of lead that usually lets a team breathe, settle down, and start thinking about control. But New York did not panic. The Knicks looked across the floor, found James Harden on defense, and made a decision that changed the entire series. They dragged him into the action again and again. Jalen Brunson did not attack randomly. He hunted. Every screen, every switch, every possession had a purpose. If Harden was guarding the ball, Brunson went at him. If Harden was hiding on the weak side, the Knicks pulled him back into the play. If Cleveland tried to survive the possession, New York simply repeated the same pressure until the defense cracked. And it cracked fast. A 2-2-point Cavaliers lead disappeared. Brunson took over late, New York forced overtime, and what should have been Cleveland's statement win became the first warning sign that something was deeply wrong. The Knicks did not just steal Game 1, they found the blueprint. After that, the series became less about talent and more about exposure. Game 2 followed the same pattern. Cleveland still had stars. Cleveland still had size. Cleveland still had a home crowd believing there was an adjustment coming. But the adjustment never arrived. Harden was still being pulled into action. The Knicks were still forcing him to defend in space, and every time Cleveland needed him to answer with vintage offense, the old burst was not there long enough to change the game. By Game 3, the pressure had turned into resignation. Harden gave Cleveland his best performance of the series, but even that was not enough to shift the feeling. The Cavaliers were down 3-0, and the building truth was impossible to ignore. New York had taken Harden's greatest weakness and turned it into a full series strategy. That is what made this collapse different. This was not just a bad shooting stretch. This was not just one rough playoff night. This was a team looking at a 36-year-old guard with 17 seasons of mileage, a fractured thumb, and a history of playoff criticism, then deciding the entire path to the finals ran straight through him, and they were right. By the time Game 4 arrived, the Cavaliers were no longer fighting for control. They were fighting against inevitability. Harden looked worn down. Cleveland looked out of answers. The Knicks looked ruthless. Every possession felt like a reminder that playoff basketball has no mercy for reputation. It does not care what you used to be. It only attacks what you can no longer protect. When the final score hit 130-93, it felt bigger than a sweep. It felt like a public ending. The Knicks had not only beaten the Cavaliers, they had stripped away the final illusion that Harden could still survive as a central playoff figure on a championship stage. And that is why his retirement announcement hit so hard, because deep down, everyone watching already understood. The series had said it before Harden did. His time was up, Cleveland's gamble. Before the sweep, Cleveland believed it had made the move that could change everything. On the 4th of February 2026, the Cavaliers traded Darius Garland and a second-round pick to the Clippers for James Harden. The reaction across the NBA was split. Some saw ambition, others saw panic. For Cleveland, the idea was simple. Donovan Mitchell was the main scorer. Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen gave them size, defense, and stability. But in the playoffs, they needed another creator, another veteran who could slow the game down, read the defense, and make big possessions easier. That was supposed to be Harden. And at first, it worked. Harden gave the Cavaliers more control in the half court. He created cleaner shots, took pressure off Mitchell, and helped Cleveland reach its first conference final since the LeBron era. For a moment, the gamble looked smart, but the cost was always there. Garland was younger, quicker, and still part of the future. Harden was 36, carrying years of playoff scars, defensive questions, and the weight of never winning a ring. Cleveland was betting that his basketball IQ and experience could survive one more deep run. Then the Knicks tested that bet. New York did not care about Harden's past. They did not care about the MVP, the scoring titles, or the step-back threes. They looked at who he was in 2026, still brilliant with the ball, but no longer strong enough defensively to hide in a brutal playoff series. That was the twist. Harden helped Cleveland reach the stage it had been chasing, but once they got there, he became the matchup New York attacked again and again. The trade was not a complete failure. It gave the Cavs belief. It gave them a real run. But in the end, Cleveland bet on one last version of James Harden, and the Knicks proved that version was no longer enough. The body was fading, but the fire wasn't. The easiest version of James Harden to criticize is the one people saw against the Knicks. Slow on defense, late on rotations, unable to punish New York enough on the other end, a former MVP being hunted possession after possession until the entire series turned into a reminder that time always wins. But that was not the whole man, because before the collapse, Harden was still fighting for something. Earlier in the season, he suffered a fractured right thumb. The kind of injury that could have given any 3-6-year-old player a reason to step away, protect himself, and think about the future. Harden did the opposite. He tested the hand. He worked through the pain. He came back because he believed this Cleveland team might be his last real chance at a championship. That matters, because whatever people say about his playoff history, Harden was not going through the motions. He was not just collecting checks. He was chasing the one thing his career never gave him, a ring. And maybe that is what made the ending so painful. Harden still had the mind, he still saw the floor, he still knew where the pass should go before the defense moved, but the body was no longer responding the same way. The step was slower, the recovery was harder, the margin for error was gone. That is the cruel part of aging in basketball. The belief leaves last. Harden could still look at a series, a roster, a matchup, and convince himself there was a way through. He could still tell himself Cleveland was good enough. He could still believe the Cavs were the better team even after the scoreboard said otherwise. To fans, that sounded impossible. To a competitor, it made perfect sense. That belief is what carried him from Oklahoma City to Houston, from Brooklyn to Philadelphia, from Los Angeles to Cleveland. It is what kept him searching after every failed run, every trade, every criticism, every joke about the missing ring. The fire never disappeared. But against New York, fire was not enough. Not when Brunson was attacking, not when the Knicks had the matchup they wanted, not when every possession demanded a younger version of Harden that no longer existed. So the final image became painful because it was honest, a great player still willing to fight, trapped inside a body that could no longer carry the full weight of his ambition. And that is when the story stopped being just about failure. It became about time. From OKC's sixth man to Houston's king. Before James Harden became a symbol of unfinished greatness, he was the young left-handed guard in Oklahoma City who changed games without needing the spotlight. In OKC, Harden was not the face of the franchise. Kevin Durant was the superstar. Russell Westbrook was the storm. Harden was the weapon off the bench, the player who could enter the game and instantly bend the rhythm. He was calm, creative, and dangerous in a way that made people around the league wonder how long he could stay in a sixth-man role. By 2012, everyone had seen enough. Harden won Sixth Man of the Year, helped Oklahoma City reach the NBA Finals, and looked like a future star hiding in plain sight. Then came the decision that changed everything. The Thunder chose not to pay the full price to keep him. Harden was traded to the Houston Rockets, and in one move, he went from third option to franchise cornerstone. Houston did not ask him to fit in. Houston handed him the keys, and Harden exploded. Almost overnight, he became the center of an entire offense. The ball was in his hands. The spacing was built around him. Every possession became a question for the defense. Stop his drive, stop his step back, or stop the pass to the open shooter. Most teams could not stop all three. That was when Harden stopped being a promising talent and became the Beard, one of the most feared offensive players in basketball. He was not just scoring, he was controlling. He slowed defenders down, forced them to guess, punished every reach, and turned isolation basketball into a full system. Houston became his kingdom. The same player OKC once used as a luxury off the bench became the player Houston built everything around. And for years, that decision looked genius. Harden made the Rockets relevant again. He dragged them into the playoffs, filled arenas with belief, and gave the franchise an identity that was impossible to ignore. But this is where the tragedy began too. Because once Harden became great enough to carry a franchise, the expectations changed forever. Regular season brilliance was no longer enough. Scoring titles were no longer enough. MVP numbers were no longer enough. Houston did not just need Harden to be special. Houston needed him to win everything. And that was the burden he would carry for the rest of his career. The offensive revolution. In Houston, James Harden did not just become a superstar. He became a system. Everything the Rockets did was built around one idea: put the ball in Harden's hands, spread the floor, and let him make the defense choose its own punishment. If defenders stepped too close, he drove past them. If they backed up, he launched the step back three. If help came from the corner, he found the open shooter before the rotation could recover. It was simple to describe and almost impossible to stop. At his peak, Harden turned isolation basketball into mathematics. Every dribble had a purpose. Every hesitation was a trap. Every defender was forced to play a guessing game they usually lost. He did not need constant movement around him. He was the movement, he was the pressure, he was the possession. Then came the numbers that made his case undeniable. An MVP season. Multiple scoring titles, a 36.1 points per game campaign that placed him beside names like Wilt Chamberlain and Michael Jordan. A stretch where 4 0-point nights became normal, 5 0-point games felt possible every week, and 6 0-point explosions no longer sounded impossible. But Harden's real impact was bigger than the box score. His step back three changed the league. Young guards copied it. Defenders feared it. Coaches built coverages to survive it. What used to look like a difficult shot became, in Harden's hands, one of the most dangerous weapons in basketball. He did not invent the move, but he made it famous. He made it efficient. He made it feel inevitable. That is why Harden's legacy cannot be reduced to playoff losses. For nearly a decade, he changed how NBA offenses thought. He proved a guard could be the scorer, the passer, the foul drawer, and the entire engine of a team at the same time. Houston Harden was not just great, he was historic. And yet, the same greatness created the problem that followed him forever. When a player controls everything, he also carries everything. Every win becomes proof of genius. Every loss becomes an accusation. That was the deal Harden made without ever signing it. He became the offense. So when the offense failed, the blame came for him first. The ring that never came. For every legendary number James Harden produced in Houston, there was always one empty space beside it. No championship. That is the shadow that followed him everywhere. MVP, scoring champion, all NBA, offensive genius, all of it was real. But every spring, the same question came back louder. Could Harden's style actually win the biggest games? In 2018, he came closer than ever. The Houston Rockets had the Golden State Warriors on the edge, not just any Warriors team, but the dynasty with Stephen Curry, Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green. The team that felt almost unbeatable. The team that had broken the league's balance. And Houston was up 3-2. For a moment, Harden was one win away from changing everything. One win from the NBA Finals, one win from rewriting the conversation around his career. If the Rockets finished that series, Harden's legacy might look completely different today. Then the door slammed shut. Game 7 became one of the cruelest nights in modern NBA history. Houston missed 27 straight three-point attempts. 27, a number that still feels impossible every time it is said out loud. Shot after shot came up short, bounced away, or rimmed out. The system that had carried Harden and the Rockets all season suddenly betrayed them on the night they needed it most. Harden scored, he fought, he did not vanish completely, but the result did not care about context. The Warriors survived. Houston went home. and Harden's best chance at a ring disappeared. That series became the great what if of his career. What if Chris Paul had stayed healthy? What if just 3 or 4 of those missed threes had fallen? What if Houston had reached the finals and Harden had finally gotten the stage his numbers deserve? But legacy does not live on what if. It lives on what happened. And what happened was that Harden came close, then never got that close again. Brooklyn was supposed to be the answer. Philadelphia was supposed to be another chance. The Clippers were another stop. Cleveland became the final gamble. Every time, the ring stayed just out of reach. That is what makes Harden's story so painful. He was not a player who never climbed the mountain. He climbed high enough to see the top. He stood close enough to touch history. But every time, something broke before he could grab it. In the end, the missing ring did not erase his greatness. But it made sure his greatness would never feel simple. The super teams, the drama, the chase. After Houston, James Harden's career became a chase. Not for numbers, he already had those. Not for respect as an offensive superstar, he had earned that too. What he needed was the one thing missing from the resume, the one thing critics could still use against him. A ring. Brooklyn was supposed to solve it. Harden joined Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and on paper, it looked unfair. 3 elite scorers. 3 players who could create from nothing. 3 stars who, if healthy and locked in, should have terrified the entire league. But basketball is not played on paper. The Nets never became the machine people imagined. Injuries hit. Chemistry came and went. Outside, noise grew louder. The super team that was supposed to deliver Harden's championship window started cracking before it ever fully opened. So Harden moved again. Philadelphia offered another promise. Joel Embiid gave him an MVP-level partner. The 76ers had size, scoring, and a fan base desperate for a breakthrough. But instead of a clean championship run, Harden found more pressure, more front office tension, more questions about his role, his contract, and whether he could still be the same player when the playoffs tightened. Again, the ending was messy. Then came the Clippers, another stop in a career that had become defined by movement. Los Angeles had name value, veteran talent, and another chance at reinvention. But by then, Harden was no longer viewed as the missing piece. He was viewed as a risk. A genius with the ball, yes, but also a player carrying too much history, too many exits, too many unanswered postseason questions. And still, he kept chasing. That is the part people forget. Harden could have accepted the label. He could have faded quietly into good numbers and old highlights. Instead, he kept searching for the right team, the right moment, the right final chance. Cleveland became that final chance. A young core, a serious defense. Donovan Mitchell as the lead scorer. Mobley and Allen inside. Harden did not need to be Houston Harden anymore. He only needed to be the veteran brain that helped push the Cavaliers over the edge. For a few months, it felt possible. Then the Knicks turned possibility into reality's coldest lesson. From Brooklyn to Philadelphia, from Los Angeles to Cleveland, the chase always ended the same way. Something broke. A body, a system, a relationship, a matchup, a moment. And the ring kept moving further away. The final verdict begins. So what do we do with James Harden now? That is the question his retirement leaves behind. Not whether he was great. That part is obvious. The real question is how the basketball world should remember a player who changed the game, dominated an era, and still walked away without the one prize every superstar is judged by. For his critics, the case is simple. Harden's playoff resume never matched his regular season brilliance. Too many exits, too many quiet elimination games, too many moments where the defense found him, targeted him, and forced the conversation back to the same uncomfortable place. Against the Knicks, that criticism had its final piece of evidence. Harden was no longer the unstoppable weapon. He was the matchup New York wanted. He was the defender Brunson searched for. He was the veteran Cleveland needed to protect, not the superstar who could protect Cleveland from collapse. That matters, but it is not the whole story. Because the other side of the case is just as powerful. Harden was an MVP, an 11-time All-Star, a scoring champion, a member of the NBA 75 team, one of the most productive offensive players ever. He did not just put up numbers. He forced the league to change. The step-back three became a global move because of him. Isolation basketball became efficient because he mastered it. The idea of one guard controlling, scoring, passing, spacing, and tempo all at once became a blueprint other teams tried to copy. That is not ordinary greatness. That is historical influence. And this is why Harden's legacy feels so difficult. If he had won one ring, the debate would be softer. People would call him misunderstood, brilliant, ahead of his time. But because the ring never came, every flaw gets louder. Every missed shot in May becomes evidence. Every trade demand becomes part of the case against him. Every playoff disappointment gets stacked on top of the last one. Still, reducing Harden to what he failed to win would be too easy. Some players leave behind trophies. Some leave behind movements. Harden leaves behind both brilliance and frustration, both admiration and argument. His career does not give fans a clean answer. It asks them to hold two truths at once. James Harden was one of the greatest offensive players basketball has ever seen. James Harden never finished the story the way a player of his talent was supposed to. That contradiction is not a weakness in the story. It is the story. What James Harden leaves behind. James Harden leaves the NBA without the ending he wanted. No championship parade, no final shot that sealed the title, no image of him holding the Larry O'Brien trophy after all the years of chasing, moving, adjusting, and believing. The ring never came, and that truth will always be part of the story. But it cannot be the whole story, because if basketball history is only about who finished with the ring, then we miss the players who changed how the game was played. Harden changed it. He changed what a guard could be. He changed how defenses prepared. He changed how young players practiced. He made the step back three more than a highlight. He made it a weapon, a system, a language. For nearly a decade, Harden forced the NBA to react to him. That is legacy. The lesson of his career is not that failure erases greatness. The lesson is that greatness can be complicated. Sometimes a player can dominate, inspire, innovate, and still fall short of the final prize. Sometimes the most human stories are not the clean ones. They are the ones filled with brilliance, mistakes, belief, regret, and unfinished business. Harden's story also says something about time. Talent can last. Skill can age well. Basketball IQ can keep a player alive long after the first step fades. But eventually, the game asks the body for something the mind still believes it can give. Against the Knicks, Harden's mind was still fighting. His pride was still fighting. His fire was still there. The body simply could not carry it anymore, and there is no shame in that. 17 seasons in the NBA is not an accident. An MVP is not an accident. Scoring titles are not accidents. Changing the geometry of modern offense is not an accident. Being hated, loved, copied, criticized, defended, and debated for almost 2 decades means you mattered. James Harden mattered. Maybe he will never escape the missing ring. Maybe every legacy debate will still include that empty space. But the fair way to remember him is not by pretending the failures did not happen. It is by seeing the full picture. The genius and the flaws. The numbers and the scars. The step back and the silence. The chase and the ending. For young players, the lesson is simple. Chase greatness. But understand that the scoreboard is not the only measure of your impact. For fans, the lesson is just as important. Criticize the game, debate the legacy, argue the moments, but do not forget the human being inside the jersey. James Harden gave basketball everything he had. The ring never came. But the imprint he left on the sport will not disappear. So now it is your turn. Comment 1 if James Harden is a first ballot Hall of Fame legend, no matter what anyone says. Comment 2 if you believe the missing championship will always keep his legacy incomplete. Like the video if you respect what Harden gave to the game, share it with another NBA fan, and subscribe for more stories where the real drama begins after the final buzzer.